Hi everybody, welcome to Beyond the Bench, where we discuss taking hardware through production and the stories along the way. My name is Bill Brock, CEO of Peridio, the ecosystem for building and maintaining advanced embedded products.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Bill Brock, CEO of Peridio, and we have a very special episode for you today. I have Frank Vasquez, supervillain of the open source community and Yocto evangelist. So excited to dive in and educate you all a little bit more about Yocto, what it means to the embedded space, and really where it's headed broadly. So Frank, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you, Bill. This is like my first time as a guest on any podcast ever, so I am very excited.
Well, we're excited to have you. And a lot of the listeners, our audience spans the gap between like engineering managers, CEOs over connected products, connected devices, and then also folks who are extremely technical on the edge. And I think what is exciting to me about having you on is just generally understanding where Yocto fits in that landscape and giving them a better picture as to, when and where it's a kick-ass appropriate solution. So I think before we get into that, we'd love to hear how did we meet? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I met Justin, your chief product officer, in Berlin at the Linux User Space Conference. So this is it's called All Systems Go. Cool
That's
name.
Right. Yeah,
it's really the System D conference. So, System D is like the init system that's standard on pretty much all the mainstream Linux distros. So the whole System D team was there talking about, what they plan to do in System D. And Justin had a presentation on Peridio. And so as far as I know, we were the only two Americans there at this conference.
Did you get to do any of the, it was Oktoberfest around then too. Did you get to partake?
Sort of. So one thing they did is they had this river boat ride after the first day of the conference. All the attendees got on a boat and, they had hors d'oeuvres and they just rode all around Berlin. It was awesome.
We were previously in Vienna the week before, and I had to peel off and get back home. But Justin was really excited about tying those together, and I think it was a really sweet time to be out there. That conference, how much of it was focused on embedded development versus just
not at all?
Really
so. Besides being the only two Americans, Justin and I were the only ones talking about Yocto. Everybody else was talking about System D, Nix OS, weird user space things that most people don't know about. I don't know, there's all this stuff about managing your home directory, graphics stacks, TPMs, which are the secure elements that handle secure boot and LUKS encryption of drives. So pretty low level stuff, but I mean all of it was aimed at the cloud, not embedded. There were a lot of people from Meta at this conference, and they were engineers. So Meta manages, they run their own servers. They have their own infrastructure. So they have to deal with secure boot with TPMs and System D a lot. So that's how they run a lot of their microservices is using System D. So they were very prominent at this conference.
So Linux is obviously super nuanced and a deep topic in itself, and as evidenced by the last 3 minutes of conversation and this whole conference. And Yocto is even more specific. It's building your own Linux for the embedded use case. So how did you? I actually have a thread going with somebody online right now about finding embedded Linux talent. Where do you get Yocto people? How did you even find yourself in this world?
All right. I'll start from the very beginning. As you can see, I've been waiting for this.
Waiting for this one.
Yeah. So, okay, zoom back to January 2009. The housing bubble had burst. Stock markets, in free fall. I got laid off from my first job out of school. So my first job out of Cal Poly was at IBM. So I was there for like a total. I started as an intern. They call them co-ops, and then I became an employee. And so I was there like a total of 4 years, I think, and I was completely burnt out.
And were you like a Linux guy at that point, or what were you focused on?
Yes, yeah, I was. So I'd become a Linux guy. So like IBM, had their own Unix. I mean, they still have it. It's called AIX. It's really weird. I would never use it. I mean, I had to use it because I was at IBM, but
Sure.
Even at IBM, nobody wanted to use it, and and I fell in with a bad crowd at IBM. Let's say and so
The
they
future supervillain crowd.
Yeah. Here's my supervillain origins. So these people, they arrived at IBM through an acquisition. They'd all worked together at Informix, which was like a big SQL database vendor. So initially, IBM tried to kill the Informix product. They failed because it was just too good of a product. Like their users did not want to move off of it, and so they ended up keeping the Informix product around, but all the engineers that had worked on it, they got assimilated into the DB2 organization. So DB2 was like IBM's Oracle competitor.
Mm-hmm. What was the other IBM database? Was it IBM AS400, or what was their like document store database that they had?
I don't know, but we were trying to do document storage in DB2. So I worked on the XML storage and indexing team at DB2, and that all fell apart just like XML fell apart. Yeah. And so the approach that DB2 took to XML was like, well, we're not going to reinvent the database. Like, I mean, there was this whole NoSQL movement that was just getting started. You have like MongoDB and CouchDB and all these document databases now. That was just getting started when I worked at IBM. So IBM's approach was like, we're going to extend the relational database to handle XML documents because they wanted those two to interoperate. It didn't work. The XML storage didn't go anywhere. I learned a lot. I got into Linux through this Informix crowd that was working on DB2. So most of them were based in Beaverton, Oregon. So IBM has a lab in Beaverton, Oregon. And so I got to know the engineers there who were, very experienced from having worked on Informix. Just like it was a culture clash, because these were very like agile,
startup-y, hip
yeah.
New thing. Then IBM is not.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a lot of politics, a lot of culture clash. I made the decision to align myself with them,
with the renegades.
And that was the wrong decision because I got laid off.
But you might have been the best thing to come out of IBM in the last 20 years. Who knows?
But so they taught me Linux because all their servers that they were doing development on were Linux boxes. So they were running on IBM hardware because everything had to run on IBM hardware, but they weren't running AIX. They were running Linux, and IBM was using Intel's compiler to build DB2 at the time. And the compiler on Linux is GCC. So these people were all developing on GCC, and debugging, using GDB and all the standard Linux stuff. So so that was my whole entry into Linux, And I used to get a lot of pushback. My manager didn't like the fact that I was so into Linux. They had been doing AIX for so long.
Can you please just learn AIX? Please.
It was more like, well, what's wrong with AIX? Like, why do you gotta go? Why do you insist on using Linux? And I was like, because Linux is the future. They obviously they don't want to hear that. Yeah.
How did you even tie this to embedded?
Okay, so I was like, all right, I forget enterprise software, right? I need to get out of enterprise software, and I didn't know what I wanted to do before I became an engineer. Went to school and all that. Like, I wanted to be a DJ. I was in LA. All my friends were DJs. Like, I went to England to just immerse myself in that whole club culture. That's all I was interested in. So there was this DJ mixer. It was the Rane TTM 57SL. So the SL stands for Scratch Live. So there was a software called Serato Scratch Live. So it's DJ software. It runs on like a MacBook or any laptop. The way it works is it's a digital vinyl interface. You have two vinyl records that have like MIDI time code, and you have a special interface. It takes the audio stream from your laptop and sends it to the mixer via USB. Okay. So I was like, well, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen that isn't a computer, right? I want to be a part of that, right? Like, where do I sign up? I was out of a job. My girlfriend, now wife, she was just like, follow your dreams, do what you want. And I was like, that's crazy. And then I went to the Rane website. So Rane is the company that makes these mixers. And there was an opening there. And it was like Linux application developer. And I was like, I could do that. I applied. They flew me up there. They put me up in a hotel. I did the whole interview loop, just like you do now. So yeah, I was like, they liked me enough to hire me, and so I moved up there. That's when I started doing embedded Linux.
What was it like at that time? This is like you said, 2009, 2010.
Yeah, this was 2009. I mean, this was the Great Recession, right? Mm-hmm. So the first months were rough because it's like I was the new guy, California. The HR lady told me, she's like, you California people, you don't last here.
You're used to too much sun.
yeah. And I was like, hey, I lived in London. I can do this. Originally my plan was to be there 2 years. I ended up living in Seattle for 6 years.
There's a lot of hardware in Seattle, surprisingly. It seems like there's quite a critical mass up there. And I didn't know this before recently, but it is a bit of an epicenter for talent and concentration of consumer electronics products.
Yeah, I found that to be the case. So besides DJ mixers, which I actually never got to work on the DJ mixers.
Yeah. God, after all that, follow your dreams.
because that's not what they hired me for. The role was to work on a new product, R&D. It was a whole line of DSP audio boxes. Yeah, so that was fun because that box, and they called it the HAL, Stanley Kubrick's Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
So it's HAL stood for Heuristic Audio Lab.
Kind of like OpenAI not using Scarlett Johansson's voice. Specifically.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, is that legal? They're like, it'll be fine. That's the thing I worked on, and that was a lot of fun. It ran Linux. This was a Power PC, a CPU. So, big endian, weird stuff. This was Freescale. So Freescale made the SoC. Kevin Frank, who was my mentor there, he knew embedded Linux inside out. I didn't come in there totally green. After I got laid off, I took a course. It was an embedded Linux course, and it was part of a UC Berkeley extension. And yeah, that was my crash course in embedded Linux.
And what was embedded? Was embedded Linux like necessarily Yocto at that time, or was it just running Linux for an embedded device?
So Yocto had not really arrived. So there was this thing called, Open Embedded was already around. So Yocto was kind of a rebranding of Open Embedded in a lot of ways. And that, I don't think that happened until like 2010, maybe even 2011. So that's when the term Yocto showed up on my radar. At Rain, we used a build system called LTIB. Well, actually, Kevin Frank, my mentor, is the one who used it. He was the one building the Linux kernel for these DSP boxes. And so LTIB is like a Freescale thing. So that was like the first embedded Linux build system I'd ever encountered.
You're talking about, like, I say Yocto, you say build system. So, like, for those that are listening that aren't super familiar with Yocto, can you talk a little bit about, like, what does it do? Like,
sure. So before I got into Yocto, I used Buildroot. As the name implies, you're building a root file system. So the root file system is your user space. So it's all your executables, configuration, various daemons.
And people still like Buildroot. I mean, it's still being used, right? Yeah,
Buildroot is great. I mean, it's the fastest way to get a bootable image.
Yeah.
I mean, even now, it's much faster than Yocto in that regard. So besides the root file system, like, you need a Linux kernel, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to build a Linux kernel, configured for your target board. You also need a bootloader, right? Like, you need a bootloader to get you into that Linux kernel. So it's like 3 stages. Like, you got to build the bootloader so that you can load the kernel. The kernel starts. The file system gets mounted. So these file systems are all part of the kernel. The first program that runs after the Linux kernel, you transfer control over from the kernel to user space, is this is process ID 1. Is the init system. These days, that's usually system D. And so that's what starts all your services and daemons. And so that's how servers run, right? It's like servers are not really interactive. It's just like everything goes when you power up the system. A build system allows you to build all 3 of these things for, your custom PCB.
When I think about embedded Linux, there's a lot of different, like, schools of thought right now. And when people are building embedded Linux on the edge, and it's obvious that Linux plays a space in edge products, whether that's, AV equipment or remote gateways, or like, when is Yocto the right solution? Like, what are the trade-offs in your mind of when you would say, I should have this custom build for my PCB?
If you're dealing with a single board computer, it's easier to do it with Buildroot. Because it's like, you're not customizing anything, right? You know what this is going to run on. You're usually not adding any special hardware to it.
So, like, very, very minor customizations.
Yeah, exactly.
Doing something out of the box, maybe a single board computer, Buildroot. Or what about is Docker a triggering word for you? Like these?
No, I love Docker. I use Docker every chance I get. So, I mean, it's actually, a Buildroot image combined with Docker, because you can just add Docker as a package that's already included on your Buildroot image. And then, then you can just pull a container from anywhere and run that container on your Pi or whatever your single board computer is. I think that's a great combination. I mean, it's probably the quickest way to get something up and running. So where Yocto comes in is like, you have a custom board.
You're a
You know,
hardware manufacturer. You are building your own products.
yeah, you've added peripherals, so you don't just have an SoC. Like you've
Mm-hmm.
added peripherals on the board. I don't know, a cellular module, a GPS module, whatever, a software defined radio. You've got some things on there. I know, an FPGA. So at that point you need a kernel with all these things enabled in it, which means you have to configure your kernel before you build it. And then this is something people don't really talk about, but there's all this device tree configuration that happens.
Yeah.
So that is really painful and strange, but this is how you get like device drivers to bind to hardware on your board, is by configuring the device tree. So just picture you have sort of like a YAML file, and you have to describe, what pins are connected to what.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's part of the kernel build process. That gets compiled into a device tree blob. When the Linux kernel boots, like, it uses that DTB to bind the drivers to all the hardware that's on your board.
I am just selfishly educating myself right now. I am having a blast. Thank you, Frank. This is great.
Yeah, no problem.
How did you transfer more from, like, how did you find yourself as the resident expert in this space? Then you went from, learning and being educated, having some good mentors, and now you're rewriting the book, like the book on Yocto that people train around. How did you, what was that evolution like? So
after Rain, I ended up working for a small imaging sonar manufacturer, and I started there December 2013. And Soundmetrics, they'd been around for a few years already, but still very much a startup. It was founded by applied physics professors. They wanted to sell it to the military. That didn't happen, and so they ended up commercializing it. The original product, which was called the Didson sonar, was very cool. It was a diver-held sonar. So the sonar would have like these goggles with like a VGA display inside of them. They would swim around with the sonar and kind of use it as like a flashlight. So they could point it at things, and then it was like underwater night vision. Yeah,
that sounds like a dream job. That sounds like so fun.
That was hands down the coolest thing I ever worked on. That was like a DOS application.
Are you kidding?
Yeah. So it was just like, it was like totally like a one-man show. So Bill Hano, who was one of the professors that founded the company, I think he designed the hardware, he wrote the software, like he did it all. So they hired me because they were developing like the second generation of this imaging sonar, and they were like, well, it needs to run Linux because like we're not doing it in DOS again. for obvious reasons, and so that's how I ended up doing embedded Linux there. I developed a new diver held sonar for them called Defender. That was so cool, man. I did everything on that. Like, I did my own graphics stack. Like, I didn't use I did the UI. I did it all. It was so much fun. I don't know. I remember they told me like we sold 4 of them or something. And I was just like, oh god.
Did you get to keep one?
No. These things. They cost like, I don't know, $70,000 or something.
Oh my god,
yeah. It's like, no, I did not get to keep one. Yeah, it would be great. Jump in my pool with my sonar.
You won't hit the walls.
Yeah. So I was back in Silicon Valley. I needed to find a job, and that's how I ended up at Helium. And I won't go too deep into the whole helium story because that's like a whole
It's a whole other
other episode. But so they hired me to bring up their hotspot. So this is a consumer IoT gateway. So they had prototypes. They knew it was going to run Linux, so they needed an embedded Linux expert. And so they hired me. I found out later that my image is like running on over 200,000 devices worldwide.
Wow, that is cool.
So after I finished that stint at Helium, that's when I did the book. So the book came out May of 2021 is when it was released. Books always take longer than you think. I didn't even start from scratch, like the book had already existed. There'd been 2 editions of the book that Chris Simmons wrote. The publisher Packet hired me to write the 3rd edition. They just picked me out of the blue. In order to promote the book, I attended there was a Yocto summit that year. So I did a presentation on runtime package management in Yocto. It was the first time I'd ever spoken at a conference. I was hooked. People who attended were hooked, and I've just been doing more conferences ever since.
That is really cool. We do have to wrap in just a minute, and we could just keep this going for days. This is a lot of fun. But I'm curious, like in this community and what you're seeing at large in the edge space, what do you think the next 5 years looks like for Yocto? IoT and edge is so formative, it seems still, and people are figuring out the best practices approach. There's still lacking standards. So what do you think the next 5 years is in the Yocto world?
I am actually making a big push to move Yocto into the cloud.
Oh wow!
Take Yocto beyond embedded and move it into the cloud. So that's where I'm going with it.
So actually, for server management, and
you can use Yocto to build OCI container images. So Docker container images. You know how you do Docker build and you get an image. You can do the same thing with Yocto. So you're thinking well, what's wrong with Docker? Why even bother with that?
This? Yeah.
So the reason is security.
Yeah, and this is a big deal, right?
Yeah, it is. It is a big deal. So Yocto gives you the 2 biggest things. It gives you an SBOM. So it tells you all the packages that are installed on your image.
This is legally required now in EU and going to be very important.
Exactly. Yeah. So all the versions of those packages, there are these CVE databases, critical vulnerabilities and exposures. So you can cross check that SBOM against the CVE databases to see what exploits you're susceptible to. So obviously, your boss wants to see this, right?
Yeah. Not even wants to, is going to be told he has to. Yeah. It's just.
That's the biggest thing that Yocto gives you, is it gives you an SBOM. The other thing it gives you is it knows all the licenses of all the software on your image. So that's another thing, because
you just get full inventory, visibility, traceability. A lot of it's there. That is cool.
So what's happening in the open source world is that the licenses are changing. So there were licenses that were open source that aren't anymore. If your developers are using this software, and a lot of them are, because those are great. I mean, you need to be in compliance now.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered that. So let's stay in touch on this point. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So Yocto on the cloud, y'all heard it here first. Frank, this is awesome. Yeah. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you for coming on the show. And I can't wait to have you back 6-8 months and see how things are continuing to progress.
Looking forward to it. Always great talking to you, Bill.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you.
Bye.
All right, everybody, just a quick reminder, this podcast is presented by Peridio, the ecosystem for building and maintaining advanced embedded products.